In this video, we're gonna look at the new activity result API. This API is used to start your activity for result. In the last video, we saw how to use the old and outdated method using the start activity for result function to start an activity and receive the data. This method is not recommended because the launched activities can only send result back to the initial activities that started them. So for whatever reason, if the initial activity instances are destroyed or recreated, then the launched activities can't send result back to these initial instances of activities because they no longer exist. And this is very problematic. The new activity result API solves this issue. The new activity result API does this by using callbacks. What is callback? A long story short, think of callback as functions, and these functions are passed as parameter to another function. This other function does some calculation and then calls the callback function, passing in the result. These callback functions are designed in such a way that they expect result and they have code to handle those results. The new activity API has a similar design. Essentially, you register a callback to an activity. These callbacks aren't bundled with the activity. Instead, they stay separate. This activity result API is aware of the life cycles of the activity they are attached to. So for whatever reason the activity this callback is attached to gets closed and recreated, these callback functions aren't recreated or reinitialized. Instead, they get reattached to the activity and then pass the result to the newly created activity instance. Okay, let's start using this activity result API in our code. So every activity has a register activity for result method. This method is used to register a result callback for the activity. This method takes in two parameters. First one is contract and the second one is called callback. So when you call this register activity for result method, it returns our activity result launcher instances. Let's take a closer look at the parameters this method expects. The contract parameter expects the implementation of activity result contract interface, and the callback expects activity result callback interface. So if we wanted to run this function, we need to provide a concrete implementation of these interfaces. Before we provide our own implementations, let's use the predefined contract implementations. You can check the doc to see all the list of predefined contract implementations. I'm going to leave you the link to the documentation. Here's the list of all the available contract implementations. So we got capture video, create document, get content. So these are all classes. So let's say if you choose the get content contract, there are a couple of things you need to take into note. First, you need to know what type of input it expects. For example, this contract expects the input as a MIME type and the output as a URI. So if you open the documentation for the get content, you can see what's the return type of this contract and what intents they are using. Some additional information to modify this class, I guess. They haven't listed what action they're using for the intent, so they just tell what this contract does. So basically this is the contract to prompt the user to pick a piece of content, right? So you can see what each contract does by just reading the documentation. I'm gonna leave you to that. Okay, let's use the get content contract. So before we do that, let's register callback to this activity. We can use the register for activity result for that. Now we need to provide the concrete implementation for the parameters. So let's use the get content for the contract. And for the implementation, we can just use the lambda expression. As you can see, we already get the hint what type of result this callback's gonna receive. It's URI. So we can explicitly give it the type URI, and then we can do some stuff with that URI. Okay, so when we call the register for activity result, we get a activity result launcher instance. So I'm going to edit that variable to have a launcher keyword. Okay, now we can just use this variable to launch the activity wherever we want. So I'm going to use that to launch inside of this composable, maybe inside of a button. So inside the onClick event handler, I can just use the variable. Okay. And then I can, it has a launch method, right? So this launch method expects an input that's defined inside of the contract. So when we looked at the contract implementation documentation, we saw that it uses the input for the MIME type. So we just need to pass the MIME type for the intent. So I'm just gonna pass star. Okay, I'm just gonna pass this for the MIME type. And that's pretty much it. When you call the launch method of activity result launcher, it actually starts the activity using the intent object inside of the contract. Let's see what happens when we click the button. Okay, this launches a file picker. When we click the button, we got a toast with the URI object converted into string. So this is how we use the predefined contract implementations. But so there are, like I said, you just need to know what type of input it expects, and what type of output you get in the callback function. What if you wanted to launch activities using custom intent? For that, you can use startActivityForResult contract. So let's try using that. So this contract takes the intent as the input, and for the output, you get the activity result instance. This instance contains a result code and intent. The intent object the launch activity has created. You can then use the result code to check if the task was successful or not. If the task was indeed successful, you can then run some code. So let's get the intent object we received from the launched activity. We can get that by calling the result data. So I am planning on launching the get content action. So essentially it's the file picker app. So it returns the URI inside of the intent.data. So the result, I'll just log the content using the toast, or good old friend toast. So let's also try create another button. So I'm using the launcher that this register for activity result function returned. So for the input, we need to pass intent. For the action, I'm gonna just pass in the action get content, and let's try running it. So this custom intent launcher we created just should do the same thing as the predefined contract. Right, we need to set the MIME type. Okay, let's do that again. Okay, it did the same thing like we predicted. So now we can launch activities using intent. It launches the activities we pass using the intent we provided. So this is actually a generic contract, predefined generic contract. So let's create our own fully fledged custom contract next. So in the beginning of this video, I said register for activity result accepts two parameters. First one is the contract and the second one is the callback. The contract expects implementation of activity result contract, and the callback expects the implementation of activity result callback. So in order to provide the implementation, we might need to look at these definitions of these interfaces or abstract classes. So this is the abstract class definition of activity result contract. So I got this from ChatGPT, and you can probably find this in the documentation as well. So they're using, so if you look at this abstract class, we can see that they're using two generics, I and O. This I is used in create intent abstract member for the input parameter, and then they're using the O for the return data type for this parse result function. So let's try implementing this. I'm not gonna implement the get synchronous result. It's not even abstract member, but whatever, I'm not gonna cover this one. Okay, let's start implementing the activity result contract. First, let's create a class. I'm gonna call this OpenZen. we then need to extend this class from the activity result contract, passing the actual data type for the I and O generic placeholders. For the I don't want to use anything. So I don't want to use anything, any input data for this. So I'm just going to use, so if you don't want to use any data or pass any data for the input, you can use unit. And the data type I want to return is URI. No, it's string. So now we just need to override the abstract methods. We can already see some options. I'm going to override the create intent, and it auto completed for us, and it's pretty easy. So it made our job much easier. So here we need to create intent object, and we need to return it. So let's create an intent object, passing in context and the class reference. So I want to create an intent that finds this second activity. So we're going to use the explicit intent for that. It doesn't expect any data or MIME type or anything. As you can see, we made our second activity send some result back. To quickly make your activity send some results, you can use the set result and passing the result code and the intent object, and then finally you need to call the finish method. Now let's try overriding the parse result abstract method. Okay, we got that hint as well. So okay, it did most of the task for us. So we get the result code and the intent. So as you can see, this activity result contract is the first one that gets the result, not the callback, but whatever. In the doc, they return null if the result is not okay. So I'm gonna add that code. So if we do return the null, we might want to make the string nullable. So we're gonna return null. And then, so if the result is okay, we just return the string, so we can get the intent object, and the string is inside the, so we need to use get string extra and pass the key name. So the key name is Python, and the intent is a nullable type, so we need to use this question operator or whatever. So as you can see, I'm using the Python key. So alright, we just created the custom contract. Let's use this. I'm gonna call this Zen Launcher. Let's use register for activity result. For the contract, we can pass the Zen. Okay, for the contract we need to use the open Zen, and we need to invoke it. So for the callback. So if you look at the callback, this is different interface. So this is not an interface we're familiar with. As you can see, it uses a fun keyword and interface. So this is called a functional interface or single abstract method interface, SAM for short. Let's take a quick overview of this interface. SAM interfaces are used with SAM interfaces. You can create instances of these interfaces with just a lambda expression. Let's take a look at a traditional interface with just a single abstract method. For example, this interface would call back as one abstract method called onResult, and this expects a result parameter as a string, and this concrete old callback class implements the old callback by overriding the abstract method. And now we can create instances of this concrete old callback by using this syntax. So we're just calling the class, and this creates the instances of this class. So if Ali wanted to create instances of classes that implement one single abstract method, you can use SAM interfaces. So the SAM interface can have several non-abstract methods, but can only have single abstract method. That's why it's called single abstract method interface. So to create a functional interface or SAM interface, you use the fun interface keyword. So now this interface is called functional interface. So now instead of creating a class and overriding the abstract method, we can just use a lambda expression. So to create instances of these functional interfaces, we use the name of the interface and then the lambda expression. Inside of this lambda expression, we need to provide the implementation of the abstract method. So we just need so this lambda expression takes the result and does something with it, right? So we're gonna just print the result. So when you use the functional interfaces in function parameters, the syntax becomes much more readable and concise. Okay, this function callback fun takes in a callback that's a functional interface, and it calls the onResult method of that interface. So this essentially expects the instances of this old callback functional interfaces. Here you can either pass this instance like this, or you can just omit the name of the functional interface. The reason you need to include the name of the functional interface is because Kotlin's SAM conversion can't implicitly convert this lambda expression to this data type, this interface, this functional interface data type. But in the function, if you pass the lambda expression for a parameter that expects the functional interface, it can implicitly convert the lambda expression into an instance of the functional interface. So we can use the lambda expression for the to provide implementation. Since it's the last parameter, we can also use the trailing lambda syntax, so this will work. So the result is string, right? And as you can see, we got the int. It's a string, nullable string. So let's set it to some, let's just use toast. So we can't use the, we might want to use the null check for the toast to work. So this returns a launcher. Let's create a button and then use the launcher to launch it. I forgot what launcher it's called. Its name is really long and I keep forgetting it. Let's call this get Zen. On the on click, we need to run the Zen launcher and launch. And this doesn't expect anything, so but it does. If we hover over it, we get something like this. So let's click out launch. So that's pretty much it. Okay, let's press the button get Zen. This will run the launcher, subsequently launch the activity. It will launch our second activity, and then we should get a toast with the string. Alright, we got the toast. So after a bit of thinking, I think I didn't explain this part pretty well. So the activity result contract is like, it's the central part of this API, I think. For example, it has a really important job, right? This creates the intent that's used to launch activities, and also this is the first function that gets the result. So the parse result function modifies the result and passes this result to the callback. So this contract is called first, and then callback is called next. So whatever modified result this you have defined inside of this contract, it gets passed to the callback. So for example, here I got the intent object, right? Every activity sends a result in an intent object. So I got the intent object and then I modified, and then I just returned the string. So if anyone who is using our OpenZen custom contract, all they need to know is that this custom contract returns a string. So they can easily notice that. Here we can see that our custom contract doesn't expect anything, but it returns a string. So in the callback, all they has to do is expect a string. So for the input, we're not using anything. So what does that mean? So when we launch, where is it? So when we launch any activity result launcher, we can pass input to the launch method. So we're not passing anything to the input method. But if you look at this, we are passing in a string for the input. So this is where you define that kind of thing. So the get content default contract probably use the string for the input, and for the output they use the URI, I think. So in the input, you probably want to mention what kind of data type you use for the input for the launch method. So we're not using anything. So here you can pretty much use anything you want. You can use the list or a custom data class or anything, any Kotlin data type you want. And then inside of this body of the function, you can get those. For example, if I use this test object, test data class or whatever, if I use it like this, I get I probably, like here, I need to set the test here, because generally if you looked at the definition of this contract, we saw that it uses that placeholder generic for here, right? So we need to use that here, and then we can use that. We probably, okay, I think we can use that. And then you can probably use those when you create the intent. For example, I can use the type which I'm expecting as a MIME type, so I can just set the MIME type of this intent by just using that input. So to set the MIME type, we use the type and input type. So essentially we are using the input, whatever the input is passed, to create intents, to customize creation of our intent objects, I think. Right, as you can see, I can call the input type method used in the data class. So essentially this OpenZen contract, so if we use the OpenZen contract in the what's that, register for activity result or whatever, then inside of the launch it expects the test data class for the input. So we need to pass an instance of test data class. For the type and the data. So essentially what I'm trying to tell you is that by using the input output data types for this activity result contract, you can make this customizable, right? So you can create different activity launchers by just passing in different values for this input and output. I mean, base for the input, I guess. The output is probably what you set. So you can modify the output. Also, we need to return this. So we finally made it. We have some basic understanding of how intents work in Android. In the next video, we're going to build an Android app using the things we've been learning so far for the past few videos.